You know, what was the purpose? What was the sense? Over 900 people dead, 102 women, women, 32 children. Some of the women were pregnant. I mean, we're talking about, a lot of people dying for this. So, but what Iran did show is that it can strike Israel. The Israelis haven't been forthcoming about their losses because they can't be. According to Channel 13 in Israel, we are talking massive losses. Now, I don't know if any of that can be verified, but Israel itself hasn't opened up and said, remember last time when the Iranians attacked Nevatim airfield, within days, we had camera crews out there saying, okay, they hit here, but they didn't do anything. Ain't no camera crews going to any of the Israeli air bases right now for a reason. Just like there's no camera crews allowed to roam Tel Aviv and take a look at the strategic facilities that were struck. Iran hit Israel hard. Now, Israel showed that it is capable of reaching out and touching the Iranians, but it was Israel after 12 days that was begging for a ceasefire, and it was the United States that desperately went through this active theater at the end. The attack that Trump says, obliterated the Iranian nuclear. We warned the Iranians in advance. We warned them in advance. Their counterstrike, they warned us in advance. This is where we're going to strike. This is how many missiles. Please evacuate. We don't want to kill anybody.
We don't want to kill anybody. The end of this war was theater, a theatric, so that people could say, okay, everybody did what they need to do. Now we're going to end the war. And that theater was brought on by Israel, which was severely hurt by all of this. They don't want to talk about it. They're broadcasting as if they've somehow come out of this ahead. The Iranians been far more open about their losses, their casualties, and the Iranians say, we're ready to do this again. So even though it's a rough draw, these are two punch-drunk fighters that went to their respective corners. If they want to come out and answer the bell, advantage Iran. I agree with them. Well done. I mean, I don't agree with his cause or anything else, but what they accomplished was phenomenal. They, over the course of 10 plus years, apparently together with the CIA, they built a massive organization inside Iran, sustained it, that was able to establish, warehouse-sized drones that were capable of assembling drones and then disseminating these drones in operational cells throughout Iran and position them to have a decisive impact against Iranian air defense, to assassinate senior Iranian leadership, to, take out ballistic missiles. Well done. I mean, my God, if I were carrying out an operation of this nature, I would want those results now. I would also want to protect my assets. The Mossad has abandoned nearly 1,000 of its agents now to be hung by the neck until dead because they recruited throwaway assets. They recruited Afghans, Indians. It's the typical model. People need to know, and hopefully they've learned now that if you get recruited by Mossad or CIA to operate inside of Iran, you are a disposable asset. You will be arrested and you will be hung, and nobody's going to come and rescue you. But be that as it may, Mossad accomplished a great thing. Now, whether they can replicate this down the road, I don't know. But I think it is interesting, the linkage he's made with the CIA. The CIA for the longest time had something called the Iran Mission Center, which was created to do just this kind of operation. The Iran Mission Center, my understanding, is dissolved because a decision was made during the Biden administration that we weren't going to go to war with Iran. And the Iran Mission Center was about war. But the Near East Division of the CIA's operation wing, their Iran desk, they maintained all the contacts, they maintained everything they've done, and they've maintained the liaison with the Israelis. So, the U.S. is capable of providing tremendous amount of material support. If you remember, Stuxnet was the virus that was inserted into the Natanz centrifuge facility. That was a joint U.S.-Israeli operation. The Israelis went rogue in the end, but it was developed and maintained, monitored by the United States. You have to know and have to believe that there are scores of operations of this sort that have been conceived and may have been implemented, and some of which may still be held in reserve for any future activity. So, well done, Mossad. It doesn't mean I support what they're doing, but hey, you got to call a win a win. I mean, if the Yankees are paying Boston, I'm a Yankees fan, but a Boston Slugger comes up in the ninth inning and knocks one over the green line, you got to say, well done. I don't like the outcome, but well done. If they haven't been advocated. It's very rare that Israel have a case officer inside Iran. There was evidence that Israeli special forces, and it could have included some paramilitaries from Assad, were operating on the ground inside Iran on the first night or so, carrying out, direct action operations using, special missiles designed for that purpose. These are primarily Saudi, it might call Shagdal and some other, special operations unit, maybe Mossad's version of ground branch. But it doesn't appear that any of them were captured. They were all extricated. Generally speaking, the Mossad agents will be operating either there's a huge CIA base in Azerbaijan that runs operations of this nature and was heavily involved in this effort. The Mossad is working with them probably in an offsite shared facility. Same thing in Kurdistan. Up in Erbil, there's a huge Mossad presence working with the CIA again to project force into northern Iran out of Kurdistan. And there's every reason to believe that there's a similar CIA Mossad base in Pakistan working the Baloch front. So that's where your case officers will be on the outside looking in as opposed to be on the ground running things. What will Netanyahu expect Trump to do next? It all depends on what Trump has signed off on. I personally believe that Trump has signed off on regime change in Iran as his primary objective. And everything else is just a subterfuge, and the Iranians should treat it as such. There will be no diplomacy with the United States. This talk of Wyckoff going in and, opening up the $30 billion, well, Trump has already said that's nonsense. But even if it wasn't, if you can't believe anything, Trump has already been exposed as a liar. I mean, the American people have to say, quit high-fiving yourself saying, hey, that's cool. Trump lured him. That's the American president. United States has now been exposed globally as a liar. Straight up liar. Can't trust him. Diplomacy in America means nothing. It's a subterfuge. Nobody can trust anything. Sign a treaty with America. It doesn't matter. We won't abide by it. So stop high-fiving yourselves and understand this has done critical damage to the reputation of the United States. But the bottom line is, I believe that Donald Trump is committed to a policy of regime change. He would like to have the nuclear program eliminated using regime change and the things that can happen there as opposed to direct military force. But he's boxed himself into a corner here because what happens when it emerges that, we know that the Isfahan is intact and Iran's not giving it up, it may turn out that Fordow is intact and therefore the best conventional strike capacity of America. DARPA's best minds didn't do it, what they were supposed to do, and the Tons wasn't. It was. The reason why they built Fordow is they knew the Tons was going to be destroyed. So Natanz did what Natanz was going to do. But now there's a third facility that can be opened up to replace Natanz. And now you have a nuclear enrichment program that Trump says will never be allowed to exist. What do you do? Well, what is he going to do? Do you think he'll be tempted to use nuclear weapons on Iran? Yes. The fact of the matter is there's only two ways to take out the Iranian nuclear program. One is that the Iranians do it voluntarily. So you have regime change and the new regime says, we will turn everything over to the IAEA and you get rid of it that way. The other way is using nuclear weapons. And there is a war plan in place that's already been designed to do this. Back when Trump, was talking about attacking Iran in his first term, he was told that our conventional munitions can't do this, that if you want to take out these nuclear programs, you got to use nuclear weapons. And a new nuclear employment plan was developed that has nuclear weapons available to target these facilities. And so I think Trump will probably go into a longer regime change game right now. But if that doesn't work, if it fails, then Trump may have no choice but to either reverse course. Obama did it. I just want to tell everybody, you don't always have to go to war. Barack Obama had promised to go to war if Iran wouldn't give up its enrichment program and ended up negotiating the JCPOA instead. But if Trump's not willing to find a negotiated outlet and he insists on the elimination of an enrichment program Iran won't allow to be eliminated, then the fact of the matter is the only choice he has, the only weapon he has that can accomplish that is a nuclear weapon. I believe they're capable of doing that. Whether or not they're going to jump from A to Z is another question. I do believe there are rational voices in the Trump administration that would try to mitigate against that kind of outcome. But the bottom line is Trump has boxed himself in. He has insisted on zero enrichment. He's insisted that the Iranian government give up this capability. Iran has said, we will never give up. And he has said that Khamenei has to go. I mean, he is talking about regime change. So I believe that's the direction that he's headed. I think right now people might be saying that you have to build a better case for war. One of those cases might be what I call the inspection trap. That is, now that the IAEA has been disgraced and shown to be little more than an espionage front for the United States and Israel, Iran says they're not welcome back in. And so you might see the United States trying to lead the charge to get the return of the inspectors and make the case that if inspectors aren't allowed back in, then we have to assume that Iran is building a nuclear weapon. Therefore, we have no choice but to move in with massive strength. And look, DARPA spent 2 years, according to Peak Headsap, with their 2 scientists to come up with this strike option against Fordo. And if it didn't work, what other options do you have? DARP is a Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. It's sort of this, it's an organization that does advanced technology, et cetera. And they have some of the best minds in America. And 2 DARPA scientists, according to Pete Hegseth, have been evaluating the Fordo facility for many years, coming up with this strike plan to put, this many GBU-57S through a refrigerator door sized target to destroy. For them, this Theodore Postal, who's an MIT arms control specialist who's been, reviewing nonsense like this for years, has already debunked the DARPA scientist theory. He's gone through the science of the strike, looking at the geology, etc. And he contends that these bombs wouldn't even come close to making the penetration necessary to achieve the outcome that Hegseth is crowing about. That's the path we're on. It doesn't mean that's always the outcome you're going to get. There's a lot of variables in here. I mean, you saw Trump's panicked social media posting about Benjamin yet not you is legal problems. Bibi's in a lot of trouble, and we don't know what the outcome of that will be. If the Israelis had received the damage that their own Channel 13 and others are talking about, Israel is not ready to begin attacks again. If they haven't received the damage, then Israel can do a rapid turnaround. We have a lot of airplanes flying in with a lot of munitions, so they can reload that. I think the critical thing here is Trump's domestic political reality, where, if there's enough voices within MAGA who are speaking out against the, possibility of war, Trump may have to, have a second thought. But there's a lot of voices yelling before the bombing. It seems to me that the voices have somewhat dissipated because they are loath to be seen as being unpatriotic or anti-American. And that's the genius of the propagandist approach taken by Hegseth and Trump, to loudly crow about an outcome they can't demonstrate. But then to say anybody who doesn't support this is unpatriotic, not supporting the brave pilots, not supporting the 2 DARPA scientists, these wonderful people who made this all possible in theory. And I see that, and I'm fearful that the domestic opposition that could stop a war isn't manifesting itself. And so unless something else happens, and that's always a possibility, I'm afraid that we are on a weeks or month-long path towards the potential of nuclear weapons being used against Iran. The Trump, I believe, will make a play for regime change together with the Israelis, and that will fail. And then when that fails and the Iranians don't allow IAEA inspectors back in, I think you're going to see Russia and China putting pressure on Iran to allow them back in to try and prevent this very outcome. But if Iran says no, they spied on us. Judge, let me just give you a quick background. When I was a weapons inspector in Iraq, we installed a camera monitoring facility, a system to all of Iraq's industrial infrastructure. They had the capability of producing things that could be used in weapons of mass destruction. These cameras were in place and were directly fed into U.S. Central Command and the CIA, who, picked the targets, the timing, and everything. Now, these cameras supposed to be used for arms control monitoring, but instead were used for targeting by the United States military, United States Intelligence Service. The IEA did the same thing. They had their cameras in there. That camera information was fed to the Israelis and to the United States and was used for targeting purposes. The visits of the IEA gave away targeted information. Grossi met with Israeli officials and handed this over. He allowed his inspectors to meet with Israeli intelligence officers to share information, to take taskings from the Israelis, to go back into Iran and pick out specific things. The IAEA is 100% a corrupt institution. They can never be trusted again to carry out safeguards agreements, and until it's reformed, Iran would be lunatic to allow them back in. In order to do that, you can't continue to go down to manufacturing a case for war. At some point in time, you're going to have to learn how to live in peace with the Iranians. Oh, slam bam, they wanted to burn me and all that. So I'm not somebody just, popping up at the last second. I said it because it's the truth. What I said is, if you don't want to have a nuclear weapon, then why do you posture as if you're going to have a nuclear weapon? I know why. Professor Morandi explained it. He said, we want to appear to be a threshold state. I said, why? That's raving. Waving the red flag against Israel and America, who are looking for any excuse to charge any. This is why I said it. I'm not out here to cause trouble. I'm just out here to be factual. And what I said is that Iran's 60% enriched uranium, the levels they have, the amount of bombs that could be produced by that, will be used as an excuse to go to work. On June 10th, General Kurilla from Central Command briefed the United States Congress word for what I just said, word for word. I don't make stuff up. I've been studying this thing forever, and I know exactly how the United States government works. I know how they think, I know how they operate, and I knew what was going to happen. And that's what I was trying to say. Don't do this, because if you do this, regardless of your justification and legality, if you do this, they will attack you because all you did is wave the red flag in front of the Israeli bull. And the Israeli bull is insane. The Israelis have always held off on attacking Iran when you couldn't articulate a cognizable case that Iran was pursuing a nuclear weapon. In the Iranian posture at the last time we spoke, a rational person, I consider myself to be a rational person looking at the totality of the data would say Iran is literally a political decision and a couple technical evolutions away from having a nuclear weapon. That's a threshold state. They don't want to be there. That's not where they need to be. They have no right, no business being there if they don't want a nuclear weapon. So Iran needs to back down. Had Iran not advanced itself to that, we keep saying Israel would look for another excuse. They've been looking for excuses for decades. The big excuse to carry out this blow was nuclear weapons. Now they've moved to regime change. And I don't know, you want to talk to that and be more than happy to talk about that. But the regime change is never your going in proposition. All right. That's too extreme. Nobody's going to buy into that. It was nuclear weapons. And had Iran not done what it did in becoming a threshold state, I don't think we'd be where we're at today. I'm not blaming Iran, but they're not totally, they can't walk away from the saying we didn't do anything. It requires the patience of Job, but there is an end. There was a path that Iran was on, and it's one that I was encouraging Iran to do. I mean, who am I to encourage anything? But internally, I was like, this is good. What you're doing is smart, what Iran did. And it shows the maturity of the Iranian government. First of all, you're 100% correct. As long as the United States is being directed by Israel, they were never going to get a break from the United States. Iran was never going to get a break from the United States. But again, we beat this. You can't just invent a nuclear weapon out of nothing. And for Iran, there were required steps that would have to undertake that would have triggered exactly what we're seeing right now. Iran was never going to be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. It's just a fantasy that was just never. I know it's hypocritical. I know it's unjust. I know it's all that. I'm just stating the facts. They were never going to be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. Okay, now, but your thing is then they're cutting this perpetual trap of, being oppressed. Iran became a BRICS member. That was their pet, Iran just signed a strategic framework agreement with Russia, surprisingly to many people, no military component. Why Russia was offered it, by the way. Russia was like, we'll do this, we'll do that. And Iran's like, no, we got this. We're a proud nation. We have capabilities. We don't need that. And look at Iran today. They're doing everything on their own. Boom. But part of that strategic framework was economic in nature. The North-South economic corridor connecting Russia with Iran through the Caucasus and everything. And now we're in a situation because the other thing I said is the United States will not be able, neither will Israel, to take out Iran's nuclear program. They won't be. Israel's already admitted we can't do it. Can't do it. No kidding. We knew that going in. Now America's going to come in and Trump thinks he's going to fly a handful of B-2 bombers over Fordo and drop, the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator and solve this problem. It won't. And then what's going to happen? And I'm telling you right now because I know this to be the case. We have a nuclear strike plan against Iran. And we're heading on this path now because of our collective impotence when it comes to Iran, that we will have no choice but to use nuclear weapons to defeat Iran. That's what I wanted to prevent. That's why I brought it up. I actually thought that we would negotiate in good faith. I believe that, because this man sent Steve Witkoff off to Russia to negotiate, that we would negotiate in good faith. This is where you can call me out if you want to say anything. You can say Scott Ritter was naive, guilty as charged. But you know what? As an American, that's not nativity. I didn't think it was possible. That we would do something like this. That's not who we are. We are capable of doing horrible things. We went to war against Iraq in violation, but at least when we went to war against Iraq in violation of international law, we went through the motions of pretending that the law mattered. We did go to the United Nations. We did go to Congress, and yes, we told lies. We fabricated a case, but we at least pretended that due process mattered. But I just want to make this point where it's not just the IAEA's report. The IAEA, their inspectors have had full access to the totality of Iran's nuclear program, the infrastructure, the buildings. I've done these inspections, so I know exactly what I'm talking about. And I've done them in the context of what I'm about to say. One of the problems with the UN inspections in Iraq is that we were thoroughly infiltrated by intelligence operatives from nations openly hostile to Iraq. The Iraqis brought that up as a problem from the very beginning. But we said that you don't get to dictate the composition of our teams. It turns out the Iraqis were probably right. But I do know this. I know for a fact that and I feel sort of guilty about this. I ran a peer inspection, meaning that I knew that I was trying to carry out the mandate, and the inspectors know the briefings I gave and how strict I was. I sent a French colonel home. A French colonel sent on a mission by the French general staff. I fired him on the spot for sending a report back to France without going through me. I said, I understand there's national reporting, but as chief inspector, I have to know everything you're saying, and I have to determine if what you're doing is in conformity with the mandate I've been given. He sent a report home without my permission. I fired him on the spot, caused an international incident, but I don't mess around. I sent U.S. inspectors home for the same reason, because I maintain purity. But there are other inspectors who came in, played the game, then returned home with very specific information about where in a building a specific piece of equipment was, etc. And when the United States then attacked Iraq, they used that intelligence to be very specific. Automatically, the IAEA inspectors have done this. The Iranians have the proof that Grossi is and has been meeting with the Israelis, that the intelligence that gathered by those inspectors has been passed to the Israelis, and the Iranians know now that the Israelis have incorporated that, because it doesn't take a rocket scientist. If you go through the Natanz Hall and you know where things are, and that's where the bombs are hitting, you mean somebody's reported that back? This is the end of the IAEA as a credible organization. But Grossi is a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. And the IAEA has disgraced itself. It's a shame because I work very closely with the IAEA in Iraq. And I know that while some of the people were questionable in terms of who, they would say, I'm a good American. I said, yes, you are. So am I. But when you take this job, you've promised that you're going to adhere to a Security Council resolution mandate voted on by your government. So being a good American means that you will do what the American government voted for and not allow any, unwritten mandate. The IAEA has corrupted itself. This is beyond belief. I just wanted to throw that in there, that this isn't just a matter of, looking bad. They are bad. They are the problem. They provided intelligence that helped Israel carry out this knockout blow, and they helped set it up. Iraq was never going to beat us. It wasn't even going to be close. And the proof is in the pudding. So we could afford to go through that. The difference today is that we can't beat Iran. So the Iranians, I can't remember exactly how many military districts they'd had, dozen or something, but they basically broke Iran up into little fiefdoms that in time of war could operate independently of Tehran on a plan that's already been agreed upon. And it didn't matter if another fiefdom fell, this fiefdom would continue to fight as a fortress. And they went underground and they brought in missiles. They brought in everything. So it's not as though Iran has all of their weapons in one place where it can be hit and everything's gone. They have dispersed underground throughout all of Iran the ability to defend themselves. And then once they did that, they began to improve their capabilities. I spoke to President Raisi in September of 2023 when he was in New York, and I asked the question about nuclear weapons and deterrence. And I said, you say you don't want to have a nuclear weapon, but unless you have a declaratory policy about your ballistic missile use,